Welcome to Compelling Conversations. I'm your host, John Silber. Born in Fountain Valley, California in 1971, but living in Rome, Italy since 2003, author Scott Sussman spends his time reading, writing, teaching, and playing the harmonica. He's published excerpts of his first book in an anthology way back in the 20th century and poems in various magazines since. His first children's book, Silly the Seed, was self-published by his company Octopus Ink Press in the spring of 2011. He's had a number of follow-up works since, including Weird the Beard, The Mark and the Molecule Maker trilogy, and his upcoming release, Fred and the Monster. We'll discuss that and much more today in detail as we welcome author Scott Sussman to this episode of Compelling Conversations. Thanks for joining us, Scott.
Thank you very much, John. How are you?
I'm extremely well, and yourself?
I am absolutely fantastic.
And we should let everyone know that that Scott is indeed joining us from Rome, Italy, where he resides full-time. And why don't we begin with that, Scott? Why don't you tell us, how is it that you, well, first off, why don't you tell us where you got the interest to write, of all things, children's stories?
Yeah, good question. I mean, why children's stories? I think I enjoy one thing that when you write for a child, also an adult can appreciate the story. So you're writing for all ages, while if you write something more mature and sophisticated, a child's not going to be able to relate to it. So you're reaching, an audience at a young age, and they grow up with it, and hopefully you can really affect them in a very positive way. And another reason I just enjoy writing short, I started with poetry, and I always liked the idea, for example, a quotation, just one short sentence can change your life or enhance your life in some way. And I like that. Instead of, writing a draft of something as long as War and Peace or Gone with the Wind and handing it over to somebody and asking them to take a look at it, well, that's going to take a few weeks of your time. While I can just hand you a book I've written, and in 5 minutes you've gotten through it, and again, maybe I've affected you in some special way.
Now, we were chatting before we began our conversation today about the fact of how you got involved in writing in the first place, and tell us about your roots of writing and how it came to be that you started writing.
Well, just the earliest memory I have of really kind of getting excited about writing was when I was 8 or 9 years old, and I don't really know why I used to do this, but I would take 4 or 5 pieces of blank white paper, fold them in half, and I would staple along the fold for a binding, and then I would make a cover and draw pictures and write stories inside the book, and I would sell them for 25 cents to the other students for milk money. Now,
when you were doing that, was it what were the topics that you were writing on? Were they adult topics as a child and child topics as an adult, or were they? Have you always been interested in the short focus on the younger age group?
I've always been a huge Peanuts fan, and I love Snoopy. So Snoopy was often my main character. I used to write a lot of Snoopy stories, and mostly I think that was it. I might have invented some of my own characters. Well, I invented a lot of my own characters, but the main character most often was Snoopy.
So when you're writing now, are you referring back to your youth? Are you referring to things you've seen through others? As we were discussing, as we've known each other for a number of decades, but even though you write these stories for children, you don't have any children of your own. Where do you draw your inspiration from?
Well, I could like to think of myself as a child. I don't feel like I've grown up much in the last 20, 25 years, in the sense that, of course, I have, but I still feel young. I relate to children. I relate to animals. And what do I mean by I relate to animals? We have a cat, and it's just like this creature that never grows up. I mean, our cat, her name is Jimi Hendrix. It seems to me like she's just always 5 years old. And I feel kind of like that, where, I tend to see the world through the eyes of a child.
Well, that's a great jumping off point. Let's begin with your first work, Weird the Beard. Why don't you tell our listeners about Weird the Beard, where the inspiration came from for that particular story, and the story, and why the children would be interested in it, and the adults.
It's funny you said that because the first published book is actually Silly the Seed, but believe it or not,
I'm sorry, I got that in order.
It's interesting because actually Weird the Beard came first as a character and spawned Silly the Seed in a way. But Silly the Seed was a bit more of a direct hit in terms of the simplicity and the story itself, and that was the first one that I published.
And so, Silly the Seed, the adventures of the seed that grows up to be a beautiful flower, that came first, even though Weird the Beard, as you mentioned, was a character that you had planted first. So, seed, ironic. So where do you come up with the idea of a seed growing up to be a flower? Where does that go? Do you have to run through a ton of different ideas first to get that concept, or are these all the things running through your mind and this one just, again, probably a bad pun, but blossomed into a story that you really liked? How often do you have to come up with different ideas to find the one that finally fits?
Well, it's almost like more that the ideas come up with me, and I just happen to be to write them down. In a sense, it's like if you imagine a radio that you tune to a certain frequency in order to hear the music you like. Where's that music? Inside the radio? No, the radio is just a vehicle of music. So you tune to this station, you get this music. You tune to that station, you get that music. So the music is in the air all around us, and inspiration or imagination is much the same thing. It's here, all around us, inside of us even, and you just have to tune into it. So just as the radio is not the music, I don't consider myself the story. I like to think that the stories I write are already there in their entirety, and I just have to tune to the right frequency to find them. And then in writing them down, I am the vehicle through which the story becomes readable and accessible to other people.
Now, you happen to be a great illustrator as well as a great author. Which do you consider yourself first? Are they one and the same? Who does where does one begin and the other end, if there is such a point?
Well, I definitely do not consider myself a great or even good illustrator. Silly the Seed and Weird the Beard, I did illustrate. Mark and the Molecule Maker is Eve Margarita, and also my new book coming up, Fred and the Monster, will be Eve Margarita, who is really a great illustrator. I work very, very hard to get my illustrations as simple as they are. Anybody who has seen either Silly or Weird, those are very simple illustrations, and it's a lot of hard work for me to get them even to a point where I'm satisfied with them, because I'm never thrilled with them. I always feel like it's just the best I can do.
So tell me about why in the first two books, well, now Mark and the Molecule Maker is a trilogy. So, and pardon my lack of knowledge, did Mark and the Molecule Maker come out before Weird and the Beard?
No, after.
Okay, so then your first two books were illustrated by yourself. On the third book, in the beginning of the trilogy now, you went and you parted with Eve Marguerite. Obviously, what was the change that decided for you to make that step from you illustrating to finding a partner to illustrate your works?
Yeah, and just to be fair, it's Eve Margarita, just like the drink. Strawberry
okay.
Margarita.
I apologize again. I'm working on these things.
No worries. Because Mark and the Molecule Maker is, let's say, more sophisticated story in the sense that if you read it, there's no chance I could illustrate something like that. And if you look at my, Silly the Seed and Weird the Beard are very simple stories. And in fact, I had suggested to Eve if he wanted to, illustrate those stories, do something a little more spectacular. And he felt that the simple story and the simple illustrations went quite well together. And so I felt, all right, well, we'll stick with that. But Mark and the Molecule Maker is something completely beyond my ability to even draw, illustrate, or sketch.
Now, on the levels of the stories, are the stories comparable to the age groups? Are the same age groups for Silly the Seed and Weird the Beard? Or are we taking a step up when we go to Mark and the Molecule Maker trilogy?
The only thing that might be a step up, certainly the language is a bit more sophisticated, as I mentioned previously, but Mark and the Molecule Maker, there are monsters in the story. The molecule maker makes these monsters, and I remember it's kind of funny. A couple years ago, I was at a school presenting, and this group of kids were 3 and 4 years old. And so one of the kids asked about the cover, and I mentioned the word monster, and the look on his face is he just froze, and he looked terrified. And I, for a second, thought about it and realized, oh, I guess the kid's afraid of monsters. And so I realized at that point that some kids are afraid of monsters. I don't know. So usually it's not a problem for 3, 4-year-olds that there's monsters in the story because they're not really so scary. But it can happen that kids are a little uncomfortable with the idea that there's monsters. So in that sense, you could say that maybe Mark and the Molecule Maker is for an older group. But Silly the Seed, which is quite a simple story and more of a parable in a certain sense, I one time had a girl come up and looked rather older to me in the sense 11, 12. And in fact, it turned out that she was 12. I asked her, and she wanted Silly the Seed. At the time, I had Silly, Weird, and Mark. And I asked her how old she was because I was surprised that she wanted Silly the Seed. You know, she had the money for one book. And so even though it is let's say maybe for a younger age, it tends to appeal to just about any age in the sense that the message is universal, but the reading level is definitely younger. I mean, the reading level of Silly the Seed is 5 years old, more or less, and the story itself works anywhere from 3 to 8, even though I would say it more targets 3 to 6 or 7, while maybe, let's say, Mark and the Molecule Maker is more geared towards 5 to 8.
Why don't we go through on, there's two things that you've transitioned me to there. Why don't we go book by book to go in, and rather than me recreate it, you tell as encapsulated as you'd like the story of each one. Obviously, let's begin with Silly the Seed and the adventures of Silly the Seed.
So Silly the Seed is the adventure of a seed that goes along helping his fellow creatures, and when he finds himself in trouble, a cloud rains on him, and he grows up to be a beautiful flower. And there's a message in all my books because, like I said, I think reading should be fun, but I think also people should have the opportunity to learn and grow from what they read. And that's one of the reasons I enjoy reading, you know, not just for entertainment, but I like, you know, a book to really change me in a positive way. And the message of Silly the Seed is basically that what comes around goes around. So if you're nice to people, people will be more inclined to be nice to you. If you help others, others will help you. And in fact, there's another message of Silly the Seed is that we're all special for one reason or another, but that's not enough. It's important to discover what's special about you and then to build on that foundation.
When you're working, and I want to take an aside while we're on Silly Seed, and then we'll get to Weird the Beard. When you have that concept in your mind, in addition to obviously, and you're being modest, I think that your artwork is so nice, the message is so solid. But when you're refining that, how many times do you have to write to make sure that you're getting the message that you want across? That can't be unless you're just truly amazingly gifted, and I imagine even the amazingly gifted ones have to refine the work so it gets to right where you want it to be. Tell us about that process.
Yeah, it depends. I would say I got lucky with Silly the Seed because that thing came from the cosmos. Like I said, it just sat me down and said, you need to write this down. While sometimes other stories, and actually Weird the Beard is interesting because often people read it and they don't really quite know the message, and when I point it out, they think about it and go, yeah, I see that. And in fact, I actually, when I was writing the little blurb to, you know, put on the back of the book what it was about, had to think about what it was about in the sense of a message. And Weird the Beard, which is, you know, an amusing journey of a beard that makes friends by cracking jokes, but of course the joke is on Weird when he tries to befriend a suspicious-looking razor. Needless to say, he will never be the same. That's the blurb on the back. Well, the message is that it's important to choose your friends wisely because your friends have a major influence on who you are. And they're also a significant factor in determining who you grow up to be. The idea in that book is that Weird the Beard goes along and he, you know, tries to make friends with a comb, and he tries to make friends with scissors, and his way of making friends is telling jokes, and they're not interested in hearing the joke. And then he sees this electric razor, and the electric razor shaves him, and he becomes a mustache. Well, the idea, I would say kind of not so forthright in the sense that you kind of have to think about the fact that your friends sculpt you. They change you. You become more like them. They become more like you. Hopefully you absorb their... I always ask the kids, is it a good thing that the razor transforms Weird the Beard into he becomes Murray the Mustache? Is it a bad thing? Well, that's up to you to decide. The important thing is to realize what I just mentioned as the message, which is that, your friends have a major influence on who you are, and they're a significant factor in determining who you grew up to be. So that's Weird the Beard anyway. So in that sense, the message was there, but I myself had to realize what it was. Mark and the Molecule Maker was similar. Basically, Mark and the Molecule Maker is the story of a boy whose father is a kind of madcap inventor. One night, Mark can't sleep, so he goes downstairs for a glass of water, hears something in his father's laboratory. Inside the laboratory, he finds his father's latest invention, the Molecule Maker, with which he makes, accidentally, a monster. The monster escapes, smashing through the window, and that's where the adventure begins. So here, thinking of, what is the story, trying to tell kids, it was a little bit easier to understand. I mean, again, I wrote the story, and the message was just there on its own, which was that everybody makes mistakes, but it's not necessarily a mistake if you learn the lesson. So take responsibility for your actions and remember that it's never too late to right the wrong. So sometimes the story's just already there, and I kind of have to think about what it is. And sometimes I don't know that I'm ever really having to rewrite the story for the message as much as rewrite the story to make sure that the character itself goes through a significant change, or that it's the character itself whose change, the change that happens to the character is what drives the story forward. A presentation, I've got two different ones, but they're pretty solid. I've had the opportunity to hone them and polish them to a point where I get them entertained, and then I throw in the middle some kind of something for them to think about, something to, like about the fact that reading is important not only for the obvious reasons such as getting a better job and educating yourself, but also because it opens you up to a world of entertainment and imagination. Books can take you on that vacation you might not be able to afford right now. And I think also I try to convey a message that reading is not just scholastic, something that you do at school. If you like reading comic strips, magazines, newspapers, that's reading. And I think one of the problems for some people with reading is that they associate it with the things their teachers force them or obligate them to read at school. So it's not something they do by choice, but because they feel forced. And I think it's important that for them reading is something they do because they choose to do it, and that they understand that it's not just what you do at school. Again, as I mentioned before, if you like reading comic strips, newspapers, magazines, the important thing is that you're reading, and that's reading.
When the kids see you at school, what do they typically ask you? Where are they entrenched with the book and they can't stop focusing on the characters? Are they just wanting to learn more about what inspires you to write? Are they telling you about themselves? Tell us about that experience when they're there.
Yeah, it depends. I one time had a kid ask me, "What do I eat?" Yeah,
and your response was?
I can't remember. I think I said that I hadn't eaten in about 4 or 5 years, and that I was really hungry. No, I don't remember what I said. Another kid asked me, how do trees grow? That was an interesting question. I told that kid he was probably going to grow up to be a genius. But often they ask me, what do they ask me? They ask me where my ideas come from. They ask me, did I want to write the book? They ask me... what else do they ask me? Now, at the moment, nothing else is coming to mind. Obviously, the questions tend to be pretty diversified with each group. Sometimes, very often, they don't even ask a question. They just tell me stuff like my cousin's 7 or I have a bunk bed.
Now, I guess do you enjoy interacting with adults more or with kids more?
Okay, as a teacher, I teach English here in Rome in addition to writing books and doing translations and other things. In that sense, I prefer adults because it's just I have a lot of kids that I teach, and it's fine. But with adults, our conversations can be quite fascinating, to be honest. These are people. I have students who are doctors and lawyers and priests and housewives and you name it, musicians, police officers, everything. And I not only teach at a school, but a lot of my private students, I go into their offices and homes. And so I get to see how these people live and where they work. And it's quite fascinating. While I think when it comes to writing books for children, in that context, I prefer talking to the children.
Why don't you tell us, and I'll learn as well. We've known each other for a quarter of a century. How did you end up in Rome? I know you're married to an Italian woman, but why don't you explain to us how you ended up in Rome from Fountain Valley, California?
Well, for one thing, it's a beautiful city, historical, romantic. It's got fantastic fountains, monuments, winding avenues, green parks. I like speaking two languages, especially Italian. Of course, the food is great, not to mention the ice cream. I like the fact that I don't need a car. I can walk almost everywhere. I like taking weekend trips to cities like Venice, Amsterdam, Paris, London, Madrid. There's a lot to love about living in Rome.
Did you and your spouse meet while you were in Rome visiting, or were you already living there and teaching English, or how did that work out?
Yeah, I was already living here teaching English. I was actually her boss's English teacher. And we used to sort of, Francesca and I, pass each other in the hallway. I always thought she was real cute, but there was nothing I could do about it because we were in a business environment, and to even stop and say anything more than hi would have been very inappropriate also for her. And in fact, after I finished the course with her boss, it was 3 years later that we bumped into each other on the street one day by total coincidence. And that was pretty much where it picked up.
Wow, that's a great story, and I've always known you to be a gentleman of class. So well done, sir. That you didn't break the ethical code, and yet you still got the girl in the end. Good for both of you. So as we have posted here, at your website is scottmsussman.com. That's SCOTTMSUSSMAN.com, and again, it's on the screen. You have lots of different writings. One of them, and I asked you, and I sort of know the answer ahead of time, but caught me off guard. You're writing to someone named Bradshaw, and as you've let me in on, you do not have any children currently, and certainly I hope your child would not be in the predicament that Bradshaw was in. Why don't you tell us about your blog that features 179 writings to Bradshaw, who Bradshaw is, and what your blog, when you get to it, is all about?
Yeah, it's definitely not for children. I mean, most of the things I write on there are quite fine. They're very G-rated. But sometimes I will use vulgar words just if it feels like it belongs in there. Very, like I said, very rarely. But it's not something I link to octopusinkpress.com because I wouldn't want a child going over there and reading the one thing that they shouldn't read, even though it wouldn't be too terrible because in any case, I'm not writing anything X-rated or R-rated or whatever. But in any case, I had a very good friend, one of the greatest guys in the world. I think everybody's got this person in their life, that the type that would just take their shirt off their back and give it to you if you needed it, and just made some bad decisions and took a turn for the worst. And so while this person was in jail, and you're going to hear some of what I call Roman music right now. I don't know. Can you hear that?
We can. Is that the sirens, or is that actually true music?
Those are sirens. We live on sort of a main street right in the middle of Rome near the Vatican. And so we often get these ambulances driving by, and it's wonderful.
No,
but
it's
anyway,
looking at the ambience of the area. That's great to know.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So I was saying that this friend sort of just, made some bad decisions and ended up in jail, prison, whatever. And I would write, I write letters. They're actually, you're getting these emails. Hold on. I don't even know what I want to say. I know what I want to say, but I don't know how to say it. I'm publishing these things on the internet, but of course he doesn't have access to internet in prison. So I'm sending them as letters typed because I really don't like my handwriting very much, and I think it's easier to read, and I also write faster when I type, so that I can also publish them on the blog. And I did tell him that I do that, and he didn't have a problem with it. And so it's also a way for me to, just kind of keep a diary or a journal, so to speak, and also keep my friend entertained while he's in there.
Absolutely. So it literally is a diary of your communications with Bradshaw, and a diary for yourself as well.
Yeah, pretty much, exactly.
And you've allowed us to be voyeurs into your life and your communications. That's quite different, and certainly recommended reading for anyone that wants to pick that up. And like you said, it's not of the current ilk of the children's stories. Now, you were also mentioning to me you're working on a long-form novel. Why don't you tell us about that?
It's, at the moment, the working title, which I'm not sure if this will be the final title, is The Shining Adventures of Selfpublishing. And it's longer just in the sense that, most of the books I write are 48-page picture book for children ages 3 to 8. This is going to be a middle grade work from ages 8 to 12, kind of an Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, Wizard of Oz type story, in the sense that it takes place in a fantastic world where anything's possible. And that's pretty much the gist of it, and I am enjoying working on it. And it's kind of a dream of mine, because I remember when I first read Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, I don't know how old I was, 15 or 16, and I thought to myself, if I ever write a book, I'd like it to be something like that. Not like that in the sense of similar, but like that in the sense that I can sit down and absolutely anything can happen. And an interesting story is that's where Weird the Beard and something we haven't mentioned yet, Lurky the Hand Turkey, came from. Lurky the Hand Turkey is the third book of it's not really a trilogy, Silly the Seed, Weird the Beard, and Lurky the Hand Turkey. They're kind of companion stories. Lurky the Hand Turkey is the inspiring story of a hand turkey whose wise words encourage others to see the bright side. It's just the companion to Silly the Seed and Weird the Beard. It's kind of a sort of a wacky tale of friendship and optimism. But that story, The Shining Adventures of Selfpublishing, I was working on many years ago, and originally Weird the Beard and Lurky the Hand Turkey were characters in the story. But as the story developed, I realized that they were not part of that story, but in fact had stories of their own. So I was about 20 years old at the time and had only recently discovered the mystery surrounding the number 3. What I'm referring to is the fact that our minds tend to conceive of certain concepts in threes. For example, time can be divided into past, present, future. Water has 3 states: solid, liquid, gas. Most living things exist as man, woman, child. So for this reason, I decided to think of a third character to accompany the other 2, Weird and Lurky. And as I was eating sunflower seeds at the time, I figured a seed would be a good character. And from there, the story, Silly the Seed, practically wrote itself.
Now, I had never known about I have always just called it the rule of threes, and I thought I'd always passed the limit of what I was accepted to tell. So question for you would be, it would seem that you have a limitless amount of stories and directions you could go with your characters and ancillary characters from there. Have you decided that 3 is going to be your limit with the characters of that companion stories, or is there literally no end as far as your mind will take you?
Good question. Gosh, I would say that those 3, that's it. Silly, Weird, and Lurky. Mark and the Molecule Maker is a trilogy, but I have other stories that aren't part of the trilogy about Mark and his father, the inventor, that who knows, now we're way, 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 way in the future. I just recently wrote another book, same age, 3 to 8, called Funny Bone Neptune. And that, at least at the moment, is just going to be one story, So the idea of revisiting Silly, Weird, and Lurky really almost is anathema to me, because I illustrated those stories, and I still have to finish illustrating Lurky the Hand Turkey. And even though I'm looking forward to it, I'm kind of looking forward to it just because I feel like it's the last book I'm ever going to illustrate. I much prefer leaving the illustrating up to professionals.
So, as a self-publisher, why don't you tell us about how you decided to publish yourself with Octopus Ink Press, and has that turned out to be a decision you are pleased with, or that you regret? And would you follow that same path again?
Yeah, no, I'm pleased with it. This is something I'm going to keep it short because I could talk about this for ages. But basically, what happened was the whole Facebook phenomenon. I had people who had read Silly the Seed, an early draft of it, many, many years ago. Well, now they have kids. So I got an email or a message from Facebook. I have children now. I'd like to buy Silly the Seed. Where can I get it? Well, I didn't have it. It's on my computer. Then I got another one. Then I got another one. Well, it was the fourth one that did it, where I finally thought I felt physically ill. I felt bad that I've got the story on my computer. I can't share it with anybody. So I decided to start my own self-publishing company so that when somebody asks me, where can I get a copy of your book, I can tell them here. So I really enjoy having all this creative input. What do I want to say? I love the idea that I can take a book from the initial idea and see it all the way through to the end. So, the one thing that would be an advantage to having a big, well, not big, any publisher doing behind me, is that it's really a lot of work that takes up some of my writing time. I would love just to have every day to write, or at least, the time that I'm spending planning the book tours and contacting the printer and working with the illustrator and writing emails and business letters and all the business aspects of the things that I do. I would love to just write. But I don't mind it because it's interesting to me to be able to work on my craft 360 degrees, to see every aspect of what goes in to getting that book into somebody's hand. And that's a lot of what my second presentation is about, is more that aspect of taking a book from an idea in your mind to a physical, three-dimensional thing in your hand.
So it sounds like that the Octopus Ink Press is more of a means to help you focus on what your main goal or enjoyment is the craft of the writing and the from beginning to end of the book itself, rather than the business end, as you stated.
Yeah, I mean, the key would be, because I write every day, but I also teach every day. So I would like to make a little more money with the writing so I could cut down a little bit on the teaching. I love teaching, and I would continue to teach, even if I was making plenty of money to survive with the writing. I would continue to teach because I enjoy my students and really my job. I teach classes, but I mostly teach individual, so we just talk. I'm just sitting on the other side of a table from somebody, and we're chatting. And it's interesting to me because most of my students are interesting people. So I would probably continue to do that, but maybe not. I mean, there are certain days where 8-9 hours a day I'm teaching. And I go, like I said before, from office to house to house to office. And so there's also a half an hour between lessons where I'm traveling from one place to another. And that means if I'm teaching 8 hours a day, I'm outside the house 10, 11, 12 hours a day sometimes, literally. I don't mind walking from lesson to lesson because I'm in Rome, and walking from lesson to lesson. Just this evening, I walked right past it's coming in Italian, La Basilica San Pietro, which in English is St. Peter's Square. So not too shabby, walking home through St. Peter's Square after having taught my last lesson. Actually, I walked by it twice on Thursdays. So I don't mind that, but I just would rather have a little more time, maybe even significantly more time to write.
I'd say that's a step up over Fountain Bowl. I would agree. So, well, let's get to the bottom line of how we can assist you get your goal of teaching less and writing more. People can find your works both at your webpage, which Scott M. Sussman, so it's SCOTTMSUSSMAN.com. They can also find you at Amazon.com, correct?
That is correct.
Should they look up the names of the books? Should they look up your name? What's the preferred way of reaching you on Amazon?
Good question. I think look up the names of the books. And there's also, of course, Octopus Ink Press.com. Ink as an INK there.
And all of those links are both on our webpage at WXYZ Network, on the Compelling Conversations page. They are on Scott's webpage as well, with links to all of those as well. One last question, Scott. So tell us about the person with ScottSussman.com. How does that person have it without actually having that name?
Yeah, good question. I have no idea. I suspect that the person who has Scott Sussman instead of Scott M. Sussman, which is what I have, is maybe they have a son whose name is Scott Sussman. Because I do believe, if I'm not mistaken, that the person's last name is Sussman.
Okay.
And maybe they've just blocked it out so that when their son grows up, that's the only explanation I can possibly come up with why anybody would want that domain when their name isn't Scott Sussman.
Well, on that note, we definitely appreciate your time. It has been a very compelling conversation. Hope to touch base with you in the future whenever you're releasing a new novel, and especially when you said when Fred gets done, we'll definitely touch base again, and we appreciate your time, Scott.
Thank you very much, John. It's been a real pleasure.
It's time